a look at some of the other stories making headlines this morning. Scientists at Microsoft say they have created a new state of matter called a topological state in order to power quantum computers. When such chips are cooled to extremely low temperatures, they behave in unusual and powerful ways. Many believe quantum computers could one day efficiently solve problems that would be impossible for classical computers to do. Elsewhere, archaeologists have discovered the tomb of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, the first since King Tut's final resting place was found all the way back in 1922. Officials say the pharaoh is believed to have ruled for about half a decade, some 3,500 years ago. It is the last of the lost tombs of the kings of ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty, which reigned for over 2,000 years. And the Special Operations K-9 for the Secret Service, who subdued an intruder on the north lawn of the White House in 2014, has died. The dog, named Hurricane, a Belgian Malinois, served during President Obama's second term and later became the most decorated dog in U.S. history. On October 22nd, 2014, an intruder scaled the White House fence and came within 100 yards of the president and the first lady before Hurricane pushed him back and wrestled him to the ground. Hurricane was medically retired from service after sustaining injuries during the incident. A heroic dog now passed away.
All right, still ahead, we'll break down the findings of a new study on gender equality in the film industry. Morning Joe will be right back.
Well, there's no doubt this new invention called artificial intelligence is going to dominate our culture. And like they said, regarding the world that us older ones knew before AI versus the ones that didn't, is it going to come a time to where humanity aren't going to be able to recognize the differences between before and after regarding being basically hey, the dog hit the phone. What'd you hit the phone for? Huh? Jack, you ain't a TV publisher. You're not a film artist. Jack, what are you doing messing with my phone while I'm recording stuff? Don't be doing that.
Accepting her first major acting award in her 40-year career for her performance in The Substance. She's just one of the actresses symbolizing the gains women have made on the big screen in the past year. In fact, a new USC Annenberg study finds that for the first time, gender equality has been reached across the year's 100 most popular films. And here to tell us more is Dr. Stacey L. Smith, the founder and director of the U.S.
The word I was going to use a while ago, we have been invaded or even to some degree captured or even kidnapped by this new invention called artificial intelligence. I don't know if it's going to be to the better of us, pertaining to humanity, or if it's actually going to be the end of us, because it's that spooky, it's that powerful, it's that dynamic, that I believe that either or could happen, or maybe even both. And it's kind of like what various preachers and ministers and evangelists have preached, that this entity that's going to come onto the scene is going to be like the best thing since the invention of toothpaste or toilet paper, that people are going to grab onto, latch onto, and then once they do, then they're going to identify that this very entity that they've become hooked on, hook, line, and sinker, now is actually destroying or dominating society's lives. It's a thought to think of. I personally believe that whenever it comes to the actual mark of the beast, the Bible talks about the New World Order in response to the number 666. I don't think that it's going to be computer chips originally, because I think that whenever God comes back in flaming fire and destroys everything up onto the planet, other than the planet itself and the greenery up onto the planet, that they won't have no time to use computer chips. Besides that, I feel like that a great deal of their satellites and all the above is going to fall out of the sky, and they'll basically have to start all over again whenever it comes to this advanced technology. So during which total chaos is going to be up onto the planet, and I do mean total chaos, in a zombie type state. That's whenever somebody will make a declaration of ruling the world, or being the false prophet, and that's whenever somebody will come onto the scene and entertain the idea of an actual mark or a brand, the same way as branding a cow, of the mark 666. And if you don't have this brand, if you don't have this mark, you will not be allowed to be able to buy nor sell in the new global system that's going to basically come about after the first global resurrection of the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, whenever all the saints will be changed in a twinkling of an eye, and those who are alive and remain will be caught up to the degree that every molecule in their body will be transfigurated from mortal to immortal, and we as saints will go up into heaven and live forevermore with Christ. And I realize that those that are unbelievers, or those that are agnostic, those that do not have a strong sense of faith, they're going to hear that and they're going to laugh and they're going to snigger and they're going to mock that. Well, even the Bible says of another fulfilling prophecy that in the last days that there will be mockers, that there will be people that will make fun of the Christians and say, well, where is thy promise of thy second coming, and etc., etc., etc. But of course, whenever you have a culture of people that thought that they was going to be able to eliminate prophecies by stopping, trying to stop, by either ignoring or purposely entrapping the founder of the Windmill Ministries missions, that has basically put humanity back 30 plus years. Whenever you have a group of people that's not willing to come clean and admitting that, it actually speaks volumes about their evil perception or their mental motives in what that they was trying to do all along. So hopefully this information that I put out regarding making all these digital recordings will be for the effect of helping those that are in their younger ages, because obviously the ones in their older ages didn't want this. They wasn't willing to accept this, and they wasn't willing to embrace this, which has basically put us on the trajectory of what we're on right now. So hopefully the young people, including my granddaughter, which is soon to be 2 years old, will take the initiative towards basically saving the planet. Because it's pretty obvious that the baby boomers and the elderly, pertaining to those who was born in the 40s and the 50s and even partially in the 60s or whatever, that those was the people that wanted to reject the message coming from the messenger, because they did not like or believe the message. It isn't my message. All I am is a delivery to the message. I'm a messenger boy. The message has been the message all along, coming out of the King James Version Bible, that society didn't want to accept. The elderly, the older society. So now, since we're walking off into all this other stuff pertaining to AI and all the catastrophes all over the planet, I just, I keep my fingers crossed and believing that one day there will be a group of people that will rise out of the ashes, and seeing the meek inherit the earth, just as the Bible has predicted. So I still base my findings and my future findings off of the Bible in faith in the Lord Jesus Christ.
SD Annenberg Inclusion Initiative and a lead researcher.
I'm going to walk forward right here on this. I don't know for sure what this is. this is something else that I'm really not a whole lot into. Women of the color leads 45 to 100 top crossing films of 2024. I don't know what all this is about, and to be quite honest with you, I don't know for sure that I want to indulge into that ideal or what they're talking about here. Let's move on to something else here. And it may be later on I will indulge in something like that, but right now I think other things are more important. All right, this right here is an important part right here pertaining to the deal going on right now with Ukraine and Russia that I feel like needs to be addressed. So let's watch this, Sigma, and see what they say.
Hill, President Trump's controversial pick for FBI director, facing a critical test vote this morning. The 11th hour effort by Senate Democrats to hit the brakes on his bid.
Hit the brakes.
Plus, confusion, shock, anger. The reaction inside Ukraine to President Trump's escalating war of words with President Zelensky. Also ahead, DOGE at the DOD. The potential firings and cuts that could be coming to the Pentagon. And funny money? President Trump and Elon Musk claim DOGE is saving billions. But do the receipts add up? It's 10 Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. I'm Ana Cabrera reporting from New York. Great to have you with us. We begin with breaking news in Washington this morning, where President Trump's controversial choice to be the next director of the FBI is facing a critical test vote. Now, if it goes his way, the Senate could vote to confirm Kash Patel by this afternoon. But Senate Democrats are now launching an 11th hour bid to stop that from happening. Let's get the latest from NBC's Sahil Kapoor on Capitol Hill and NBC's Ken Delanian from the Department of Justice.
Let's move on. This is politics. Let's see what this guy's saying here.
Made by the man who is asking for 10 years as director of the FBI. Now it is up to a handful of Senate Republicans as to whether they have the courage to step out and do publicly what they have told these FBI agents they want to do, and that is vote against Kash Patel.
And specifically, Democrats.
All right, let's move on. There's still politics here. Pertaining to hiring and firing, keeping people in check. It's kind of hard to convince the public pertaining to trust issues about a two-tier system that's still in play as far as I'm concerned regarding the FBI and all the other high-ranking officials. Now here we go with Ukraine.
From President Trump after Zelensky's comments about Trump living in a disinformation bubble.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions of people have unnecessarily died.
Still this morning, the diplomacy between the two countries continues on, with U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, in Kyiv. And we have some new behind-the-scenes reporting that these tensions were simmering behind the scenes for the last week before boiling over into the public view. The turning point in the U.S.-Ukrainian relationship began at last week's Munich Security Conference. You'll recall those comments from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth saying Ukraine will not join NATO. Privately, we're told, Hegseth stunned the Ukrainians when he told them at a meeting with Zelensky that the Trump administration is considering drawing down many U.S. forces in Europe. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is in Kharkiv, Ukraine. Also with us, former advisor to Ukrainian President Zelensky, Igor Novikov. So,
you know, that's the worst thing about our media and our politics here in America, in putting out too many different messages that becomes contrary to one another to the degree that now we don't know what to believe. Because it originally started out that America supported, and Canada and Europe supported the movement of the Ukrainians towards their standoff against their own people pertaining to President Putin, that we was going to back and support towards them being our full out and out can't remember the word right now, our friends that we support, our allies that we support. Now it looks like they're imaging something else differently. Let's hear what it's got to say here about all this.
As this war of words develops, President Zelensky is set to meet with Trump's Ukraine envoy, General Kellogg, today. What are the expectations for that meeting?
So I can tell you what the Ukrainian government is hoping to achieve. They want to change this narrative. They want to change President Trump's mind. They are anxious to take General Kellogg as much as they can around the country. They want to show him a different reality than the one that is being put forward by President Trump. And they also don't want to, and I've spoken to many Ukrainian officials and Ukrainian people, they don't want to be in this argument with President Trump, and they don't believe they started it. And just a short while ago, Mike Waltz, Trump's national security advisor, said on Fox News that it is the Ukrainians who need to tone down the rhetoric, and that Zelensky better wise up and sign the minerals deal. And it hasn't been reported very extensively, but we've been talking more about the comments and President Trump calling Zelensky a dictator, and Zelensky saying that President Trump seems to be trapped in a disinformation space. But this mineral deal really helped sort of sour relations. And I've spoken to a senior member of Zelensky's staff, and he said what happened was the Treasury Secretary came, he presented the Ukrainian side with a paper. They were told it was non-negotiable. They had to sign it quickly. And in this document, Ukraine was supposed to sign over 50% of its rare earth mineral rights. And they felt pressured into doing it. They didn't have any details about what they would get in return for this. And Zelensky didn't sign it. And he said as much publicly, saying that he didn't feel like he could sell his country down the river. And that certainly didn't help relations here. It seems that President Trump, because he's referenced this deal several times now, and he's referenced how President Zelensky is fleecing the United States, fleecing aid that the Ukraine owes money for the political and military support that is given this country. So that seems to be very much front of mind in President Trump's inner circle and with President Trump himself. So President Zelensky today is certainly not going on the attack. He's hosting this envoy. He wants to change the narrative, but according to the National Security Advisor, it is up to Ukraine now because Ukraine needs to tone down the rhetoric, not President Trump, who called President Zelensky a dictator, or who said falsely that it was Ukraine that launched the war against Russia.
Richard Engel, thank you so much. We just got those new
See what I'm
images
saying?
of this meeting underway now between President Zelensky and the U.S. envoy to Ukraine, General Keith Kellogg there. And we're told that any remarks that they were expected to make before cameras are not going to happen. So these images are what we're left with. Will, of course, be on top of any readout that comes after this meeting. Igor, I mentioned that new NBC News exclusive reporting about the tensions boiling over between Ukraine and the U.S., including the private comments from the defense secretary. Where does all of this leave Ukraine this morning? And what's your biggest concern about your country's lasting security?
Well, I'm obviously concerned, Anna, but at the same time, we're actually witnessing the opposite in Ukraine, witnessing a major rally around the flag effect. I mean, people are uniting behind Zelensky, and ironically, his approval rating in Ukraine, despite the fact that a major war has been going on for 3 years and people are tired, is higher than that of President Trump during his first 100-day honeymoon with the American people. So, and look, I can tell you one thing, calling Zelensky a dictator is just ridiculous on many fronts, but what blows my mind is the fact that if he were a dictator, I think President Trump would have been in love with him, as we see with Putin, for example.
And we should note that Zelensky resoundingly won his last election, but the dictator comments were connected to the fact that Ukraine hasn't held an election. There was supposed to be one last year. I know because of martial law with the ongoing war, that's why there wasn't an election. Can you respond to those who say there should be elections?
There shouldn't be elections because A, it's illegal, And in order to hold those elections, we need to change Ukraine's constitution, which is also forbidden during martial law. And we're fighting major conflict. And even practically, I don't see how those elections can happen, because half the country is abroad in different countries, some legally, some illegally. Half the country is fighting the war in the trenches. And, Russia is constantly bombarding our cities and everything. We have rockets, missiles, and like drones flying in. So I don't see how those elections could possibly happen. And if you ask Ukrainian politicians, with the exception of some pro-Russian ones who want that change of government, who want Ukraine to become Belarus or Georgia, for example, with a pro-Russian puppet government, everyone else in Ukrainian politics agrees, and the people overwhelmingly agree. I mean, the latest polls show upwards of 67% of people of Ukraine saying, like, we shouldn't hold elections until the war is over.
Igor, with President Trump, we've learned a lot can be
See, really and truly, isn't that kind of petty whenever the media and even Trump is trying to throw that up on a political level, that this guy is a dictator because they haven't held an election? Well, how can you hold an election whenever you're constantly being bombarded by all these bombs coming from Putin? That is so petty, but at the same time, it is so wickedly evil by misconstruing and taking things out of the proper perspective, that it was Putin the whole time that was lining up around Ukraine with all them tanks that even people like myself seen, give or take around 10 to 14 days before it actually occurred, that it was fixing to occur. That I have made mention of before, that even my brother and I discussed in 2014 or 2015, shortly after, whenever I come back to Northwest Tennessee, of how come Putin was looking for a different route to be able to bring in his supplies and take out his supplies, as far as going across the Antarctica ice front into another area. Well, that was a pretty good indication that they already had planned of what that they was going to do with the Ukrainians, because they was already planning on the Black Sea, or the Dead Sea, not the Dead Sea, but the Black Sea, whatever they call it over there, was fixing to be disrupted, and because of it, they was possibly going to have to bring supplies in a different direction or a different way. This is so petty whenever it comes to politicians in doing this. And the thing about it is, there is so many lives at stake here. At this point in time, it's almost like, well, who fired the first shot? Well, what difference does it make at this point in time who fired the first shot? We know who fired the first shot. Now, who's going to be the one to make the last shot? It just goes to show you how mixed up that our politicians are in America, and how mixed up that the media is in basically saying one thing but doing something completely the total opposite, or putting out too many different messages, too many different signs of the direction that the world wants to go in. Because I know for a fact, whenever all this first started with our leader of Biden being the president at that time, that if the fault falls upon anybody's feet, it falls upon the falls upon the Biden's feet pertaining to Putin, because Biden should have made preparations of being able to stop this before it ever got started good. Instead, they went to Europe, they went to Canada, they buddied up with all these other people that said that they was for them at first, and now they're backing out. Wow. If that's not mixed up, I don't know what is, towards whether or not it's a yay or a nay.
can be transactional. He argued
At the expense of human lives. At the expense of human lives.
that the U.S. keeps giving Ukraine billions and billions in aid, but isn't getting anything in return. We know Trump and the administration have mentioned Ukraine's rare earth minerals as a way to help build a, quote, strategic partnership. And Richard just walked us through some of the background on that. Should Ukraine be willing to make a deal on minerals and natural resources in exchange for all the support provided by the U.S.?
My personal opinion, yes, we should make that deal, but it's how we make that deal and what is actually in that deal. Because I've dealt with President Trump as President Zelensky's advisor during the first term, i.e. in 2019 and 2020, and I can tell you this. What's missing there, and tragically, I'm seeing the same thing happen all over again in President Trump's second term, is the lack of respect for Ukraine. I mean, it's in Ukraine's interest to make that deal. It's in America's interest to make that deal. But I think what's going on here, Putin is literally wiping the floor with President Trump, giving more and more conditions, and having made zero concessions, in the process. And I think President Trump is, because of his lack of respect for President Zelensky and for Ukraine, he's just venting his anger towards Ukraine. And that is stupid because, if China is the major opponent for the United States, that's actually pushing the rest of the world towards China. And, it could end in disaster for America's foreign policy. So I think that
not only is it doing that, but it's also putting out double standard images of basically wanting to saddle back up with President Putin and trying to make him look like an all right guy pertaining to his government. Now, since he showed his ugly side the way that he has, and it really fits under the same category in a way towards what Saudi Arabia had done for years and years and years, and how that they was destroying the Yemens, or trying to destroy the Yemens, and supplying all them different groups over there with all them bombs and everything that was basically feeding the Middle East with a ideology of hate, even though they didn't publicly say it directly. They was still part of that movement. I believe it was in 1993 towards the Middle East, saying that we was going to destroy, or they was going to destroy Israel, and the second people after the fact was going to be the United States. Since then, especially since 9/11, for the past 23 years, Saudi Arabia has tried to put on a brand new face. Saudi Arabia has tried to give out a different complete image of not only in how that it is handling global affairs, but how that it is handling even its own affairs pertaining to giving various rights to various people that before 9/11 wouldn't have ever even been thought of. So what they're doing, they're crawfishing, regardless whether it be Saudi Arabia or it be President Putin pertaining to the Russian government. They're crawfishing and trying to re-image themselves in the eyes of the people, in the eyes of the world, in a different way. And it appears, this is just what I'm thinking, from what I can see, it appears that Donald J. Trump, our American president, supports that. Because why would had a president of the United States government have said what he said about Saudi Arabia, and that the world hadn't got down to the bottom of the 9/11 attacks, knowing that it was 9/11 of the terrorists that come from Saudi Arabia, knowing that it had been plotted and planned in Saudi Arabia pertaining to 9/11. They're just using them other two guys in Guantanamo Bay basically as an scapegoat. But the true perpetrators are still over there in Saudi Arabia pertaining to the magic man, pertaining to the true Satan in the flesh. And the thing about what king going to war against another king, setteth not down first and consider the score, or the account of what it's going to cost to go to war with the other king pertaining to Bible prophecy that's in Scripture, in one of the Gospels. I don't know which one it is right now, but Christ used that as an illustration, that we understand what's at stake here, or those that's been keeping up with this does. And basically what's at stake is not just our democracy, not just our way of life, but all the other countries throughout the planet that has stood forth for the past 30, 40, 50 years, or maybe longer, in saying that they wanted the same thing, to be able to vote in and out various politicians, to be able to, for the people to speak up and say what they liked or what they didn't like, or what they wanted or what they didn't want. Now all of a sudden that's at stake. And whenever they talk about it's an American Constitution crisis, they're actually undercutting that quite a bit, because it's not just an American Constitution crisis, but it is a global Constitution crisis pertaining to all the countries that support free, fair elections and democracy and etc. So this just isn't about one particular group of people pertaining to the Russians or the Ukrainians. This has got to do with all the above that's at stake. And if the American people, especially the Christian American people, aren't willing to look at that in the truest form towards being able to see through this smokescreen, then basically maybe we are doomed. Because why would a president of the United States not only saddle up with somebody that has showed their ugly side the way that he has in the past 3.5 years pertaining to, or 4 years pertaining to, the Ukrainian war, but now wants to hold the meetings over in Saudi Arabia, knowing that it was the Saudi Arabians that wound up masterminding, that killed over 3,000 people pertaining to 9/11. Why would he do that? Is there some sort of strategy in behind that, knowing that these are very, very wicked, evil dictators? And now someone like the Russian government is wanting to crawfish. They're wanting to back up and saying, well, we're bad, but we're not that bad. Oh, really? You're still controlling and ruling your people like a bunch of cattle. You may be doing it in a disguisable way, just like Saudi Arabia, just like China or Russia. China or some of these other countries, including India. You may be disguising your overhand in different areas towards making it not look as bad as what it actually is. But in actuality, evil is still evil. You can disguise it. You can camouflage it. You can color it up any color that you want. Wrong is wrong. Evil is evil. And whenever we have a president that either isn't concerned about that, or he's using a different strategy that the people are not aware of here in America towards the will of the American people, you begin to wonder just exactly whose side is who on in regards towards all this. Because I'm telling you right now, it's not just the American democracy that's at stake. This is evil versus good, good versus evil. And if our American president ain't willing to make a stand on that, I tend to wonder just exactly what type of president that the people have voted in power, mandated towards being in power. And that may be an oncoming affair that the American people are going to have to face off on regarding whatever that he's trying to do, that he claims that he's doing it in the name of safety. He claims that he's doing it in the name of the will of the American people. But I'm beginning to be skeptical of that in seeing these great moves that our leader, our fearless leader, Mr. Donald J. Trump, is making right now pertaining to crisscrossing affairs this way. And I think I've got a right in holding him under suspicion, especially based upon what he done during his presidency right before, I think it was right before COVID hit, in how that he was trying to blackmail the Ukrainians in telling them, even though it was already legislatively sound, platted in our government of Congress, saying that the Ukrainians are our allies, and that we had made agreements with the Ukrainians for what that we was going to do for them in exchange towards them giving up their nuclear bombs. And then all of a sudden it becomes a quo pro deal that, okay, we'll do that if you agree to do this. Well, now you're putting different terms on the agreement that was supposed to have been your allies. Now you're putting out different signals to all the rest of your allies that if the American people are willing to do, a small little country no bigger than about Texas or smaller than Texas, if they're willing to do that openly to a group of people that they made vows to in standing with and standing behind, who else are they going to be willing to stab in the back? It puts out a bad vibe whenever we have a president that is stating the fact that it was the Ukrainians that started the war, and it was the Ukrainians fault that all this occurred. There's no doubt. There's absolutely no doubt. The Ukrainians are not angels. There's probably no doubt. Throwing that kind of money and that kind of power, it probably got abused. I don't know who. I don't know how. I'm not in all that stuff. But really and truly, it's our own American people's fault because they didn't monitor it like they should have had towards keeping an eye on all that stuff. But it's really a sad state of affairs whenever we're saying one thing to the world for the first 3.5, 4 years, and now all of a sudden we're going to change in midstream. What type of image does that send to the rest of our allies? Number one. And number two, which is more important, what kind of image does that say to our true enemies that would rejoice and do without food for a solid year if they could in seeing America fall? People don't understand that we have true enemies that are out to kill, steal, and destroy because they are of the Antichrist, old Persian Empire entity, evil entity, of evil wanting to dominate over good. And besides that, did we have to make out some sort of agreement pertaining to Desert Storm or Desert Shield that we was going to do what we done over there in defense of how that they was being treated if they surrendered and gave up this and gave up that? Have we made other preparations pertaining to Libya and how that they was treating their people over there and how that we interreacted in saying, hey, you can't do your people this way? Did we have to have some sort of a better edge for saying, well, the only way we're going to come over there and rescue you is that you have to make a promise that we're going to do this, this, and that? I understand that funds has been misappropriated. I understand that. But I also understand that America has always conducted a certain ethnic rule. And once we start breaking that ethnic rule, not only is our allies that we claim to be our allies going to question our integrity, but our enemies as well. And my friends, whenever it reaches that state, it's dangerous. It's dangerous upon the American people. And I feel like that it's my duty to speak out in reflection of this, because it's one thing to shave a little off the edges and to shave here and to shave there. It's kind of like I heard an example this morning on the radio of, okay, well, let's say the doctor tells the patient, you've got to lose 30 pounds. You got to lose 30 pounds. This dog over here snoring. and he cuts off a person's leg. But yet now they bleed to death. Well, what good did it do to lose 30 pounds that way if the inappropriate way that they lost the 30 pounds towards cutting off the leg, they was going to bleed out and die? So there's a right way and a wrong way about doing any and everything, regardless whether you're trimming here, trimming there, cutting here, cutting there. I mean, there has to be some sort of logic to all this other than being a wrecking ball and just going in and destroying everything. There has to be some sort of plan of action. Just like the Afghanistan war. I'm going to use that for an example. Was there really a good, decent plan of saying, this is what we're going to do on the front end of this war, this is what we're going to do into the war, and this is what we're going to do on the latter part of the war? Did our Pentagon officials, did the CIA officials, did they all sit down and say, this is A, B, and C, and this is how we're going to do it? No, we just flew into something. We just erratically flew into something, and we was hoping for the best pertaining to reforming a group of people. But we see in the exchange of that, by not doing it properly on the front end, and what the effects was on the back end, because less than 11 or 12 days later, they surrendered to the very enemy that we was telling them to fight against and bowed down to them. That was shameful in the eyes of the rest of the world towards a superpower that didn't have its act together, that basically watched a group of people do something like that after we spent 10 years with them. And I really and truly believe that that also sent forth a message to all your other enemies, regardless whether it was Russia, the parliament of Russia, the government of Russia, or the government of whatever, that they can basically do whatever that they want to do, and they're not going to have to suffer the consequences on doing it, even to their own people. Even to their own people, because I truly believe that after that occurred and the American army didn't go back in there and try to straighten out that Afghanistan problem, that basically gave a green light to Putin. Well, they're not going to go back and try to redeem those people from what they're going through. They're just walked off and forsaken them and abandoned them. And it puts forth an image. It makes a statement that others watch. They're observing, they're judging, they're looking at us, they're itemizing, they're making determinations in their own minds of what that they can see our strengths and our weaknesses in. Because trust me, we have enemies. As a Christian nation, we have people that are dead set in wanting to destroy us, even at the expense of destroying part of their own. And whenever you have an enemy, my friends, that don't mind sacrificing some of their own people to sacrifice us, then it's on like Donkey Kong. It's the same way with Russia and the Ukrainians. Russia knew, before they ever got involved in that originally they was hoping that it would all been over in less than 72 hours. Less than 10 days. They'd have surrendered, just like the Afghanistan people. Oh, we're just going to surrender and lay down. Well, once they realized that, then they had to go to plan B. Okay, we're going to have to toughen down on our own people. We're going to have to inform martial law on our own people. We're going to have to mandate pertaining to the draft. And of course, that in and of itself caused a big hullabaloo in the country towards people migrating to other areas, getting the hell out of there because they didn't support that war. And God only knows how many young men has lost their lives in the estate of Russia. That what is that going to do for the future of Russia 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 years from now? Especially whenever all the men are died. Why'd all the men die? because the majority of them went to war and got killed. Or they got injured so bad that they had to kill them anyway. Because when it comes to human rights over there, they don't deal with people like America does when it comes to helping people with bad injuries. A matter of fact, that was one of the first things that Putin said in the attack of Russia, that if anybody gets wounded, and they're to the extent that they can't hold their own, kill them. Kill your own people. Do away with your own people. That way, they won't bog us down, they won't slow us down, and we can continue to march and move towards overtaking the Ukrainians. Whenever you have an enemy, my friends, that is willing to do that, you have a true enemy. You have a true enemy that is out to steal, kill, and destroy, that is full of lies and full of hypocrisy. And it does bother me to see the strategy that this presidential government right now is taking regarding our fearless leader. There has to be some sort of practicality to all this. There has to be some sort of logic to all this, because as I said a while ago, it's not just the American democracy that's at stake. It's the world's democracy, and how the world has looked upon the rule of law and order ever since the ending of World War II. So where is this going? What is the end game? Is there a plan A, plan B, and plan C? And if it is, how come the American people aren't aware of it?
I think that the deal should be made, but it's what's in the deal and respect surrounding that deal that's of crucial importance here.
That respect piece is interesting because this war of words seems to be, each side sort of demanding that respect of each other. We've seen President Zelensky push back on Trump, but then the Trump administration appears to be digging in. Vice President J.D. Vance now calling Zelensky's public disagreements with Trump disgraceful. He says it's not something that's going to move the president of the United States. In fact, it's going to have the opposite effect. And take a listen to these other comments from President Trump and now his national security advisor as well.
You can't bring a war to an end if you don't talk to both sides. You got to talk. They haven't been talking for 3 years.
I don't think anyone should be really, criticizing the president for trying to drive this to a diplomatic solution. Why hasn't President Zelensky tried to end this war for the betterment of his country? And we have to ask ourselves, is Ukraine's position improving or not?
Igor, what options do you see that President Zelensky has at this point?
Well, I think he has a major asset, one of the best assets ever, to be had by a president, that is Ukrainian people. And I think, look, Ukraine hasn't given up over the last 3 years. Kiev hasn't fallen. So I don't think at this point trying to kind of appease that will to quickly end the war by just surrendering Ukraine to Russia. I don't think that's an option for President Zelensky. I don't think that's an option for Ukrainian people. And we're just going to keep fighting. We're very good at saying no. So I'm all in favor of a diplomatic solution, but there's a difference between a fair, just, and lasting peace and surrender.
Igor Novikov, I really appreciate your time, your perspective, your insights. Thanks so much for joining us. Coming up, pounding the Pentagon. What sources are telling NBC News about DOJ eyeing sweeping budget cuts at the Department of Defense? Plus, what the DOJ told a judge about why it is looking to drop corruption charges against New York City's mayor. We'll talk to a lawyer who was at that hearing. And later, hundreds of thousands hospitalized by the worst flu season in at least 15 years. Why is this year so bad? We're back in 90 seconds.
Let's keep going. Stop.
of Defense in Pete Hegseth, who announced yesterday that he wants senior leadership there at the Department of Defense to try to find about 8% of their budget they can cut, $50 billion or so, to try to redirect into other programs. It's not clear legally if that can be done, but he wants to try to move priorities from one part of the Pentagon budget essentially to others that he believes are more in line with the Trump administration's goals. And on that end, 5 sources tell us, he also intends to fire, perhaps as early as this week, some senior officials, generals, generals, senior officers either closely associated with Lloyd Austin, his predecessor in the Biden administration, or who backed priorities that don't align with the Trump administration. So a lot of shakeups happening potentially at the Pentagon. By the way, as congressional Republicans are still pushing to spend an additional $150 billion with a B on the defense budget next year. So not in alignment here across the Republican Party or the government.
Separately, we've heard Elon Musk sort of throw around ideas like sending checks directly to Americans with some of the Doge savings. And now President Trump is apparently on board.
Yeah, look, this is another kind of indicator of how ad hoc this process has been. The president embracing this concept last night, suggesting that perhaps 20% of the money saved by Doge could be sent back to the American people. Another 20% could go directly towards paying down the debt. Those aren't decisions that a president can make unilaterally. It would take an act of Congress to do so. And by the way, we're not exactly talking about huge pots of money here. Even if you take Doge at their upper end estimates of how much money they have found and saved, you're talking about maybe $30 a person to the American taxpayer. If you take it at the lower end, about $2 billion of savings, which some media organizations have done, you're talking about a little over $1. So, don't go spending it all in one place, at least not yet on it.
What can you buy for $1 these days? Garrett Hake, thanks so much. Let's discuss now with two MSNBC political analysts, Democratic strategist Basil Smikle and Republican strategist Susan Del Percio. Basil, this idea for Doge checks, 20% to Americans, 20%, going back into, I guess, paying up the deficit. We don't know where the 60% that's left is going to end up. But is this a workable idea?
Well, he thinks it's a workable idea, and one of the reasons he imagine that he does is because if you remember COVID and the stimulus checks, it was an act of Congress, but he, there was a path for him to sort of claim credit for it.
He wrote his name on it.
He wrote his name on it, and so for Donald Trump and his ardent supporters, they'll say, "My gosh, look what the president did for me." But in reality, when you take all of these cuts, by the way, under consideration, my sense is that the net effect for the American voter is that they're going to see their life change substantially. And so even if whether it's $1 or $5, because $5,000, that certainly makes a difference. But $1, $5, $30, that doesn't, to me, add up to a net benefit for Americans overall when they look at what it took for them to get that check.
Susan, what about what's happening inside the Pentagon in this reporting about downsizing potentially there? We've heard for years from people like Bernie Sanders, progressives, that there should be ways to maybe cut back some of that defense spending. But are Republicans going to go along with it if it's coming from President Trump and Doge?
They will go along with it because they don't have to make the decision. They don't have to take a vote on it. So they have no problem if the Secretary of Defense is willing to cut his own budget. And that's, in fact, why you see so many Republicans being so quiet about it. Because if they did have to take a vote on it, that would be a different story. But to Basil's point, and especially you look at the Department of Defense, people's lives are affected. Yep. When they do get a $100 check back. And that does resonate. But people's lives are also affected when all of a sudden they find out we're not as strong military as we thought we were. And when they're in towns that has military bases and people are being let go, because let's not forget, it's just not a base that closes, for example. It's the deli, it's the dry cleaner, it's all the businesses around that. So elected officials, Democrats especially, if they really want to show the effects of potential cuts, they have to go back to their districts and make it clear. Now, the thing about the cutting generals and others in leadership, the problem there is what they're putting it on is that a lot of these folks followed DEI policies by the previous administration. They were following their orders. These are people in the chain of command. They follow the chief executive officer. So the president, I should say, when the president says it's time to do this, the military follows. As long as it's legal.
Yeah, the commander-in-chief is telling them.
Yeah, exactly. So it shouldn't be surprising. But again, Hegseth is showing once again, he has no command of what the department does. Department of Defense does. He's just carrying out Donald Trump's wishes.
We were talking.
He's just a delivery boy.
Talking about how it's hard to kind of keep up with all the actions that are happening, and we know Doge has been in tons of different departments. They've been responsible behind firings and layoffs of hundreds. thousands, maybe tens of thousands of employees. Again, it's hard to fully wrap your head around, but consider this. When we hear from President Trump, what he says they've accomplished in Doge savings through these actions so far. Watch.
In less than a single month, the Department of Government Efficiency has already saved over this is just a short period of time, $55 billion. And we're just getting started. That's nothing compared to the numbers that you're talking about, right?
We don't know where he got that $55 billion number, partly because Doge has, posted some inaccurate savings on its website. Regardless, that sum is very far from the goal of $1 trillion in savings. And take a look at this chart, because up until this point, the areas that they're focusing on make up less than a quarter of the budget. That orange part there on the chart. Trump says he'll balance the budget, but his proposed tax cuts would put the U.S. another $5 trillion in the hole. So the only way you're going to reach that goal is by significantly carving into these other slices: Social Security, Medicare, military spending. Susan, something's got to give.
Not really with Donald Trump. That's the point, is that we've seen him operate with his own set of facts. And right now, Republicans are not holding him accountable for it. Independents are starting to give a little bit in some of the polling. But at the end of the day, people are seeing something being done in Washington. They know it may not be everything that they need. They know it may be a little unconstitutional, but they see movement, right? For the last 10, 15 years, nothing could get done. So right now they're behind it. But the fact of the matter is Donald Trump, all he needs is a little something. So he said he'll cut Social Security by $100 million, which we know is absolutely nothing in the budget. But that's a big number to people. And that's a savings. And that will resonate. In fact, Donald Trump has been winning the PR battle when it comes to the Doge savings, and Democrats have been caught flat-footed. I think they're moving their message to an economic one, like eggs are still $12. $12 a dozen.
The facts are the facts, regardless of the message.
No, not in Trump land.
I don't know that the Democrats have been left footed. I mean, they're fighting back, and they're fighting back both in D.C. and in communities. What I do think is the case is that the answers won't come from D.C.
Right.
They do come. I think they will come locally, and you're starting to see a lot of Democrats really push back locally and try to organize locally around a lot of these issues. And so when you think about, to Susan's point, when you zoom out from all of this, right, the zoom out effect is that the majority of Americans have no idea the myriad of programs and agencies that make sure that their lives run smoothly every day. They don't have to think about it.
Well, that's just like we didn't have no idea that Canada didn't allow for American banks to be in their country, neither. Up until about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, whenever Donald Trump mentioned it. There's a lot of things that the American people has been in the dark about towards not knowing the who, the what, the when, and the why. The point that I'm trying to make is this, going back to cutting a man's leg off to get him to lose 30 pounds. This could have a backfiring effect, especially whenever it comes to weakening our dispositions in our integrity with not only our allies but our enemies, but it could also have a demeanor effect regarding not being on defense strong enough in our people in check to be able to protect an oncoming event like another 9/11. But then again, you have to look at the facts of what did they allow to occur to us in the event of 9/11. So obviously all them departments and all them people either lied or they wasn't doing their jobs as far as protecting the American people towards allowing for them airplanes to come over here and do the damages that they done during 9/11. And I really think that's the part there that our investigators, our detectives, our American constitutionists need to really dig a little deeper in, because whenever Donald Trump talks about that the American people still hadn't gotten down to the bottom of 9/11, there must be some sort of a factor there, especially whenever you have all these FBI agents and all these other people that are pointing their finger directly at Saudi Arabia. And I realize that Saudi Arabia made an agreement with Congress, which I think is a way of the American people being bought out by telling them, well, we're going to hold you responsible, and if somebody sues you, that can prove that one of their loved ones died in 9/11, you'll have to take it on the cheek monetarily, pertaining to paying that family or that wife or that husband or that family member off. Really? So that's justice? In other words, if you want to kill us or kill certain people of our government over here, and as long as you got deep pockets, you can do it, and that's going to be the end of what we call justice? This is the Department of Justice whenever it's running on a two-tier system. That's basically the same thing here in America to the degree that as long as you got money and you can hire a Johnny Cochran, you can basically almost get away with murder. Because they'll try to convince everybody that if the gloves don't fit, we must acquit. How stupid can the American people be? Or how blinded can the American people be in allowing and letting this continue to fester? I realize that this $36 trillion is a horrible, horrible number, and that we need to shave off various things. We need to do various things in not being so wasteful. But at the same time, we don't need to cut off our noses to the spider faces by doing so. And that's the part that I continue to keep looking at, is that what's really in behind all this. Because a lot of these decisions that's getting made for the American people are politicians. I'm just going to use Jimmy Carter for an excuse. That's been dead now, that don't have to worry about the consequences, whenever it was Jimmy Carter that basically gave the Panama Canal away. They're already dead.
Maybe
they're already gone.
We'll be able to stop and say.
So they don't have to worry about the consequences on a physical one-to-one level. Why? Because they're already gone. But look at the decision that they made for us in doing so.
This is on Capitol Hill just moments ago. The Senate Help Committee voting along party lines to move Linda McMahon's nomination as Education Secretary out of committee. So that means she will now face a full vote in the...
Go forward. Keep going. It's awful. It is so hypocritical. So bad. Let's look at this now.
This is where people usually gather on Saturdays for the release of live hostages, but today, as you mentioned, the remains of 4 hostages were handed back to Israeli authorities from Gaza. The 3 Bibas family members, Cherie and her 2 children, Kafir and Ariel, and Kafir was just about 9 months old when he, along with his older brother and mother, were abducted, and the father, Yarden, who was released a couple of weeks ago. What you're seeing there are images of sort of this very stage-managed ceremony that Hamas put on inside of the Gaza Strip in Khan Yunis. So the remains were taken to a forensic facility.
Until good proves its point to evil, that it's not going to take this laying down, kind of like what the president of Jerusalem's doing right now. Evil is going to continue to keep trying good. So, going by the stance that Vice President Dick Cheney used towards Desert Storm and Desert Shield, towards eradicating the axis of evil, sounds good on paper, but literally is failing all over the world because of so many of the people that are good, or claim to be good, are compromising with the bad. Once more, it is the world's democracy that's at stake here, not just the Americans' democracy. And that's the part that I think a lot of our historians and a lot of people pertaining to our media that's overlooking and ain't seeing the big picture.
Update on Pope Francis. The 88-year-old pontiff remains hospitalized with pneumonia in both lungs. The Vatican says he did have a restful night. He got out of bed, he had breakfast in an armchair, and is continuing some work activities. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who met with the Pope yesterday, said she found him, quote, alert, adding that he had not lost his sense of humor. Next here on Ana Cabrera reports, winter wrath. Snow and ice taking aim at millions in the mid-Atlantic, with officials urging people to avoid travel.
That was the same guy that released the portals, the 5 portals, beginning at the year of Christmas here in America.
Rights. The right.
5 portals hadn't been opened since 1500s. Now all of a sudden they're opening up these portals.
42 million people still under winter alerts now, from eastern Kentucky to the Maryland coast. NBC's Gary Grumbach is in Virginia Beach. Gary, not quite a beach day, at least that we would.
This ain't really nothing. Let's go on. It's the flooding that there should be emphasizing upon. Now the news is repeating itself. See it? Let's go back to this right here.
Is from Russian propaganda that was handed to.
Let's back up. Back up. Back up. Sorry about the dog tipping the telephone over a while ago in my recordings.
For all the administration has done in his first term as well, and all the United States has done for Ukraine is just, it's unacceptable. They need to tone it down and take a hard look and sign that deal.
Joining us now from eastern Ukraine is NBC's Richard Engel. Also with us is Stephen Pfeiffer, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine under President Clinton. He is also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. Richard, what's this back and forth? The president of the United States more than once calling the president of Ukraine a dictator. How is that playing out there?
Ukrainians don't want to be in this fight. Ukrainians don't believe that they started this fight. They don't believe that there is a back and forth. The way it's seen here is that President Trump has gone on the offensive, that President Trump has decided he's trying to harm Zelensky. He's trying to take him down a notch. He's trying to perhaps force him to the negotiating table or force him to be more flexible. And what President Zelensky's office believes is that this goes down to that deal you were just talking about, that mineral deal. And a senior Ukrainian official described the scene to me. He said that the Treasury Secretary President Trump's Treasury Secretary had a letter and wanted the Ukrainians to sign it, wanted President Zelensky to sign it on the spot, that it was non-negotiable. And in this document, Ukraine would agree to give up half of this country's rare earth mineral rights, and that President Zelensky didn't sign it, and that he was told that Trump wants him to and that he's not going to like it. And then shortly afterwards, we start seeing these insults. And so far, the only thing that President Zelensky has said is he thinks that President Trump, unfortunately, is caught in this disinformation bubble, and he's put out numerous statements saying that, for example, the 4% figure that President Trump quoted. He said that Zelensky has terrible approval ratings. President Zelensky believes that number is from Russian propaganda, that was handed to the president or put in the president's mind by the Russian side. So now to hear the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, flipping the script, saying, well, it is really President Zelensky who is on the offensive, and they've got to stop this bad-mouthing. When you look at all that the U.S. has done for Ukraine, people here are somewhat baffled by all of that. And this is not just a simple war of words. This has serious consequences.
It's nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking that these people have went through what they've went through for the past 3.5 years, however long it was, towards having to sacrifice so much. And now all of a sudden we're just going to whitewash it, and we're going to put a different image on President Putin and the Russian politics that, it wasn't so bad after all. Now, was it? You cannot compromise with evil, with bad. And that's where Biden did not take the reins properly in avoiding where we are right now. that could lead even into a deeper problem, a much deeper problem. Especially whenever you're talking about blood grudges. This isn't just something where somebody, lied about somebody, or somebody stole somebody's goat, or somebody tried to get fresh with somebody's wife. This is a whole lot deeper than that, my friends. This is blood grudges that goes down deep. Ain't no telling how many centuries ago that now vindictiveness is on its course towards marching, and one group of people over another group of people has all this pride pertaining to being on an ego trip, and because of it, these matters could actually get worse than they are better. I hope that they don't, but they could.
Or for Ukraine, this country is in a very weak position. It is being attacked daily by Russia. Where I am in Kharkiv, every few hours we hear the air raid sirens going off. There was an attack not far from here overnight. At least 2 Ukrainian civilians were killed. There were more attacks
We sat and watched for 3.5 years those that was concerned about what was going on across the pond, over in the Pacific, on the other side of the Pacific, over on the other side of Alaska. We've sat and watched these people in Russia purposely target schools, daycare centers, fraternity awards, and on and on and on. Wasn't attacking, per se, the military that they were supposed to have been opposing, but rather turning their country into a wasteland. If that does not fit under the guidelines of a terrorist, under the original Geneva Agreement, I don't know what does. As far as I'm concerned, Putin should be looked upon as being another bin Laden. Putin should be looked upon as being a Ted Bundy. Putin should be looked upon as being another Hitler. You do not do things like that after World War II and think that you're going to do them and get away with them. And if society allows for that to happen, you have to ask another sensible question: who's next, and where is it going to be next? Who's next, and how bad is it going to be next time? So we have a trajectory of going from bad to worse to worser, and we ain't seen the worst. The worst is yet. Worst is yet, has yet to come. So it's almost as if they're purposely shaking their fist in the eyes of justice and saying, I dare you, I dare you, I dare you, pertaining to what Putin and his government's doing.
In Kyiv, this country depends on the United States for air defenses. It depends on the United States for support, financial support for the military, weapons, ammunition, of course. So this is, from the Ukraine's perspective, much more than a war on words, and they don't believe it was a war of words that they started, and certainly that they do not want to continue or escalate.
Richard Engel in Kharkiv, thank you so very much. Ambassador, just to start our conversation, what's your analysis of what this new reality is between the Trump administration and the president of Ukraine? Indeed, actually, the Trump administration and the entire nation of Ukraine.
Yeah. This is really, we've entered bizarre land. First of all, Russia started this war. Ukraine did not want it. Ukraine did not start it. And the idea that Zelensky is a dictator, under Ukrainian law, you cannot have elections while there's martial law. Ukrainians agreed with that back in last year when the presidential election was postponed.
Exactly.
And the polls just come out saying that 63% of Ukrainians now agree you cannot have elections until the war's end.
Exactly.
What I'm trying to understand, though, is why the president is attacking Zelensky and on what basis. Where does he get this nonsense?
Well, help us understand what you don't understand. And one of the things is, I'm just wondering, I mean, for example, we have to look at statements like this morning, Vice President Vance responded to criticism over the policy that the Trump administration has towards Ukraine. He wrote in part on X, for 3 years, President Trump and I have made two simple arguments. First, the war wouldn't have started if President Trump was in office. Second, that neither Europe nor the Biden administration nor the Ukrainians had any pathway to victory. This was true 3 years ago, it was true 2 years ago, it was true last year, and it's true today. So is there anything we can read into the vice president's comments to try to show some light onto the Trump administration thinking on this?
Well, here's the question. If the Trump administration really wanted to proceed in a smart way to broker a settlement between Russia and Ukraine, they could do things, but right now they're making mistakes. They should have had the first conversation, not with Putin, with Zelensky. Ukraine's been an American partner for many years. Ukraine is an adversary. And Trump should have had an understanding of where Zelensky has flexibility and where he does not before going too far down the path with the Russians. Second, Trump should have taken steps to build leverage over Putin. The United States right now, because of the assistance we've provided to Ukraine, we have lots of leverage with Kyiv. But Trump should be building leverage with Putin. And he could do that by tightening sanctions, by working with the G7 to seize Russian central bank assets, $300 billion.
Exactly.
And by asking Congress to provide continued military assistance to Ukraine.
Exactly.
That would make clear to Putin that if Putin does not move off of his position, which so far is trying to get a negotiation on Ukraine's capitulation, not a settlement, but if the president is not building that leverage and not confronting Putin with the fact that if he does not agree to a settlement, he's going to face increasing costs militarily, economically, and politically. So the problem right now is there's an effort by the United States to broker a settlement, but it's making really amateurish mistakes.
Exactly. My point exactly. Which tells me the biasness that Trump already had against the Ukrainians is now showing up a few years later, that even he was impeached about, I believe, twice, but nobody said that it was bad enough to dismember him from his position toward being president. So you tell me what's going on. Whenever it's in the black and white, in what the world has seen, and in the way that the world has seen it, and now we have an American president that basically is caught up in this, and I guess he expects for us to either be stupid or blind or not being willing to speak out in identifying the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help us God. That's what our laws was supposed to be based around. Our Constitution was supposed to be based around. And whenever you go to improvising the truth, now you're putting out mixed signals. Now people has room of doubting and being skeptical of what the true motive is in behind our fearless leader, Donald J. Trump. This is one of the reasons why I said what I said regarding I wasn't going to vote for neither party, because I felt like that if you was to put both of them in power at the same time, you was not going to be able to settle this the way that it ordinarily gets settled, pertaining to us being in the shape that we're in, that these politicians has driven us off into, that to this day still hadn't given account for, if you put both of them in power at the same time. And this is a strong indication of that is now self-fulfilling itself right in front of our very eyes, that, yeah, you can try to act stupid. You can act like it ain't going to affect you none. You can act like, isn't none of this stuff so? That's like pretending that the sun is purple instead of orange, or pretending that heat is cold or cold is hot. You can lie to yourself all you want, but it's still not going to dismantle or disfigure the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And whenever you go to doing that, you're putting out different signals. In other words, your frame of reference is changing.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, Ambassador, with your experience, was the Budapest Memorandum, which it was under President Clinton, was it a mistake?
Well, I helped negotiate the Budapest Memorandum. So let me say, I mean, what the Budapest Memorandum did was it eliminated 1,900 strategic nuclear warheads that were designed, built, deployed to incinerate American cities. So it was a good thing for American interests. But I would also argue that for Ukraine, look, the Ukrainians themselves in 1992 asked the question, could we sustain an independent nuclear deterrent? And they concluded they did not have the financing, they did not have the infrastructure, so that they would not have been able to do it on their own. And had Ukraine tried to keep nuclear weapons, and I can understand why people now in Ukraine are saying, gee, we wish we'd kept those weapons. Had they tried, not only would they have had a hard time sustaining that nuclear capability, but they would have found that it would have been a huge hindrance to Ukraine's effort to develop relations with the West. You would not have had things like a U.S.-Ukraine partnership or a NATO relationship with Ukraine.
Ambassador Stephen Piper, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being with us this morning.
But yet now let's look at the other aspect of it. We promised the Ukrainians, in being our allies, if they would do this, and that if they needed us, that we would be there for them. So you got to look at both sides of it. You can't just look at just part of the truth. You got to look at all the truth, the whole truth, and what's going on with Ukraine and Russia. And you know what? Let's even go a little bit deeper than that and realize that Putin knowed this. Putin knowed what the treaties was. He knowed what the agreements was. So in actuality, whenever he was attacking his own people, even though it's fundamentally an internal problem, in actuality, he was attacking us. He was attacking us because he knowed what those agreements was. His government officials know exactly what that we had already made obligations with Ukraine about. So if you really want to get down to the nut cutting, as my grandpa used to say, they wasn't just attacking the Ukrainians. They was attacking the Americans. And they was hoping that the Ukrainians would buckle and do like the Afghanistan people and surrender with just a matter of a few days. Well, now we see that Plan A didn't work. Now we're seeing that Plan B isn't working as far as, well, if we make it hard enough on the Ukrainians, eventually they'll surrender, they'll give up. Well, now we're seeing that that's not working. But has anybody really sat down and put a pencil to this in understanding that there was a deeper incentive and a deeper motive in behind them doing what they was doing? Knowing the consequences? Knowing the consequences of their own government, of their own people? It really speaks volumes about their own people, doesn't it? Or it speaks the carelessness of the Russian government in a government that is willing to put its people on the line that way over trying to make some sort of a gesture or prove a point to the rest of the world. Now, friends, I'm not no war analyst. I'm not a politician. I'm not running for no office. But I can foresee what is going on, the manipulation in what is going on, and I can also foresee where the mistakes was not only in and during this Ukrainian war, but how that our politicians didn't look at this from another perspective of when it comes to consequences of how come our Pentagon didn't sit down and look at this from a deeper perspective and saying, you know what, there must have been something else here that was driving these people in the direction towards wanting to make a wasteland out of the Ukrainian people. And once more, this is a reflection upon to our reputation. This is a reflection upon our integrity of how that our rest of our allies is going to look upon to us, and how the enemies is going to look upon to us, in us not making full stances in what that we have already made agreements with pertaining to Ukraine being our allies. It's a harsh reminder that not just the American democracy is at stake, but all other democracies all over the world pertaining to a bully or somebody that's going to use this type of force, this iron fist, the same as a Hitler, or the same as, let's even go beyond that, towards of another bin Laden, an out-and-out terrorist. Because like I said a while ago, we seen where he was bombing, not just attacking the military force, but the civilian force. He was attacking schools. He was attacking hospitals. He was attacking other things, kind of like what the Saudi Arabians was doing towards. They was actually bombing while people was having funerals and weddings. Civilians. They wasn't attacking just the military force pertaining to the humans over there. They was destroying. It was a form of genocide. And that's exactly what Putin was doing, and that's exactly what's against the Geneva Convention agreements after World War II. A military force isn't supposed to attack other than another military force if it comes down to the point of an actual war. Once you start going beyond that, now you're developing the reputation of being basically a terrorist, an out-and-out evil, demonic, cruel, indifferent people, to the point that you're not no longer just targeting the military over there, but now you're targeting the civilians over there. Wow. How cruel and how barbaric can that be? And to think that the American people are going to sit idly by and sit back and say, oh, well, so what? Oh, really? What's the long-term game of all this, of this strategy? As I said, it's not just we, the people in America, that's observing this, but it's the rest of the world. And what type of integrity pertaining to our word is at stake here? Because if they can do it to one of the biggest superpowers on the planet, what's that saying about the rest of the democracy countries out there that stands for democracy or claims that they do, as far as voting in politicians and voting them out? This thing is a mess. It's been a mess ever since the Reagans and the Bushes done what they done in the 80s, and it's just now caught up to the American people. And I just pray to God that this will be resolved in a peaceful, dignified way before bloodshed falls upon to our own land right here in the good old USA. Thank you for listening. God bless America. God bless our troops. And God bless our endeavors towards which way we go from this moment on. In the name of Yahweh and the Son, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Amen.